Good morning, church. Well, this morning I'm beginning a new series entitled Morality in the Postmodern World, 10 Commandments for Today. I believe that this will prove to be a somewhat provocative topic, but also a crucial topic for us as followers of Jesus Christ who are situated in Lawrence, Kansas in the year 2022. My message this morning is an introduction to the entire series. It's an overview of the whole issue before we look at the individual commandments one by one. So let's begin with some definitions, specifically definitions of the key words and phrases in the title so we're all clear about what it is that we're talking about. First, morality. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition, defines morality as follows. Quote, the quality of being in accord with standards of right or good conduct. A system or collection of ideas of right and wrong conduct, or virtuous conduct. Wikipedia, which is hardly an authoritative source, but nevertheless it's one that is often accurate and it's representative of what is commonly understood to be the case, puts it this way. Morality is the differentiation of intentions, decisions, and actions between those that are distinguished as proper and those that are improper. Morality can be a body of standards or principles derived from a code of conduct from a particular philosophy, religion, or culture, or it can derive from a standard that a person believes should be universal. So when I say that this series concerns morality, I'm talking about the standards of conduct, actions, intentions, and decisions that are in accord with what is right, what is good, what is virtuous, and the delineation of what is contrary to those standards. To put it bluntly and simply, we're looking at the question of right and wrong. What is right and what is wrong? What is permissible and what is out of bounds? What is good and what is evil in terms of human activity? In particular, I'm asking the question, how do we determine these moral standards that establish what is right and what is wrong? Let me say from the get-go that many in our world today, and perhaps most of the people in Western cultures today, answer this question entirely wrong. And I fear perhaps that even in the church today, far too many answer this question as follows. Well, I think that... And they assume that they have just given an adequate explanation for the basis of whatever moral determination they have made. I think that. That's the declaration of my opinion, and no one can question my opinion. I am the authority over myself, and since I and I alone am the only one who can speak to what I think, therefore, my opinion about all moral questions will rule the day. Let me challenge that opinion straight on. You see, when you say, I think that, and assume that your opinion is an adequate basis for formulating the standard for morality, even talking about your own personal morality and not, say, the morality of your family or your community or the world, when you say that, you are claiming that you have a knowledge base that is sufficiently large and broad and deep, and the experience that is similarly deep, and observations that are comprehensive enough, and the reasoning power that is adequate to be able to give you the wisdom that is above that of every other person in the history of the world. So that you now stand as the pinnacle of human development, right up there with Friedrich Nietzsche. Or perhaps, more modestly, you simply think, well, I know enough to ignore everyone else and choose instead to trust my own instincts. Let me just say that standing in that spot is a dangerous place to stand. That is where most of the Western world stands today. Well, what about the term postmodern world? I expect that many of you may have heard the expression, but know little about it. That's actually not surprising. There's a lot of confusion even among those who study postmodernism today, including confusion about what exactly we're referring to when we use the phrase. But for our purposes in this series, the expression postmodern world refers to the general way of thinking that has been adopted in our culture, which has come to be the dominant view among the majority of those who are the most influential voices today, especially those in the information media, academics and the sciences, entertainment and the arts, and politics. And we can sum up the main ideas in postmodern thinking like this. There is no overarching narrative to human history that makes sense of the whole. There are only individual stories. There are no certainties, no objective truths, only conflicting interpretations. And the meaning of your life is something that you must determine, because human history and human culture is meaningless in itself. And there is no transcendent God to give meaning or purpose to life. This is the underlying and prevailing mindset of our age. But how did we get here? I'm currently reading a difficult book as a part of a discussion group that includes an international mix of Christian leaders. The title is The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. This book was recently selected by the editors of Christianity Today as a winner of their 2022 Book Awards in the category of Politics and Public Life. And the book, I'll just be honest, the book is a tough read. The author, Carl Trueman, traces the intellectual history of the past 250 plus years to show how certain philosophers and authors, scientists and poets have directly influenced one another and consequently our world today. Now, some of the names on this list of his would be familiar to many people, perhaps most. People like Friedrich Nietzsche, Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, Karl Marx, and others. But many of them would only be familiar to students of modern philosophy. Now, I'm not going to subject you to slogging through the details with me. Everybody say, thank God. Yes, you may breathe a sigh of relief. But I'd like to share with you the gleanings from this really impressive work, the takeaways, if you will, for you and me, because they are quite important. Well, you may say, I really don't care about the intellectual history of philosophical notions, whether they're from famous people or obscure people. It has nothing to do with me. And ordinarily, I would say, that's quite understandable, and frankly, I can't blame you. But ideas matter. And in this case, they matter a great deal. Here's why. Francis Schaeffer, a prominent Christian thinker, author who died in 1984, made the case pretty clear for us. He pointed out that philosophers come up with ideas. It's what they do. Now, some of those ideas are good, some of them are bad, some of them are just odd. They develop these ideas, and they teach them to students at universities, and they write about them in books that are read by intellectuals and by seekers of wisdom. Some of those seekers of wisdom are artists who embrace their ideas. And these artists, especially those in the dramatic arts, writers, poets, filmmakers, actors, directors, along with musicians and those in the visual arts, painters, sculptors, even architects. They take the ideas that they've embraced and they turn them into artistic, creative works of great skill, great beauty, and great interest. And those works become the vehicles by which these ideas, which are often at odds with traditional values of the culture, these become vehicles to translate these ideas into the vernacular of the public. Take it down from the academic, philosophical world to the world, the street level where everybody lives. And the artists use their skills at creating plays or writing plots for movies or writing songs to spread these ideas so they become widely known and they permeate the collected awareness of the general public. And even after the philosopher's ideas have been discredited or proven false or discarded by his or her peers when they're examined, those ideas have been embraced and spread by the vehicles of the artists, and they continue to take root in the minds of those who remember the movie or the song because I really liked it. And now that idea has become part of a person's world and begun to change what he or she thinks about that world. I was going to include a longer example here. Let me just, for those of you who know John Lennon's song Imagine, has a tremendous impact on the world today. Imagine there's no heaven above us, no hell below us. It's easy if you try. This is the world to which they aspire. So, you may not have any interest in philosophical speculation in the history of ideas. Again, that's quite understandable. But let me show you some of the relevant conclusions from Carl Trueman's study. First, when we think of ourselves in our culture today, we think of a person whose essential being is his or her internal self. And that person and her or his subjective ideas, beliefs, and feelings constitutes the authentic self. So my authentic self is who I imagine myself to be, apart from any influence from others outside of me, supposedly, and completely independent of, unencumbered by any outward reality. My true self is who I am inside. Secondly, then, societal pressures to conform to traditional norms or morality and mores are a form of oppression that threaten my ability to express my authentic self. And the structures and the institutions and the systems and the powers that compel my conformity, that continue to oppress me, must be destroyed and replaced with new structures, new systems that allow me to freely determine what I wish to be and what I want to do. And religious structures in particular, with their insistence upon restrictive limitations upon sexual freedom, must be invalidated and dismantled. Social revolution, therefore, is necessary to achieve authentic freedom. Third, since this revolution is necessary, but there is no transcendent reality to which humans are subject, there is no such thing as absolute right or absolute wrong. There is only what the individual person chooses. There is no morality, there are only preferences. And the goal, therefore, to which society should be moving is amorality or amorality. That is the elimination of the idea, the thinking that categories of right and wrong actually exist. So that the authentic human will transcend right and wrong, good and evil. We're above that now. However, number 4, the problem is that the vast majority of people remain unenlightened. And they will not concern themselves with the need to pursue this revolution in order to gain this goal of authentic freedom. Therefore, in order to attain the right kind of society, those who are enlightened must gain the power to bring about this change. And those who gain power, whether that's through celebrity status, political advancement, military dominance, financial wealth, or social media influence, they will determine which preferences will be permitted. So the governing elite will select those preferences and use persuasion, education, or compulsion to see that the rest of us adopt these preferences as their own, as our own. And all must conform to what the ruling class approves. Now, we have seen these things before. We've seen them under communism. We see them still. Today in China, Vietnam, North Korea, for instance, those who do not conform to the party line are routinely rounded up and imprisoned, sent to re-education camps until they comply, or they simply disappear. China currently, I don't know if you knew this, China, it's been going on for at least a year. China currently requires all of its citizens every day to view on their phone a message from the Communist Party and are quizzed on its content. They have to check in every day. Now, we've not seen such draconian measures in the West yet, but the same intolerance for dissent from the approved viewpoint exists. So today, for instance, we see examples of this on college campuses all across the country, where student demonstrations have prevented guest speakers from presenting their viewpoint because that viewpoint was objectionable to the students. Only speech that conforms to their preferences will be tolerated. Let me give you some other examples. The Canadian Parliament, which is like our Congress, recently passed legislation without debate, something that is unheard of in Canadian parliamentary history, It passed legislation making it illegal to counsel or otherwise try to dissuade someone from transitioning from one gender to another. Anyone convicted by this is subject to a $10,000 fine. You know I'm right, David, right. David, our Canadian, our token Canadian. Helps me stay apprised of all things north. By the way, a similar statute was passed in Lawrence last year with a lesser fine. In the recent months in Finland, the pastor of a church and a medical doctor have been charged with a crime for writing a statement that has been on the church's website for the past 15 years. They wrote this statement 15 years ago. And recently, it was brought to someone's attention, and they were charged with a crime because this statement on the website says that the Bible teaches that homosexual actions are sinful. It doesn't say that homosexuals should be destroyed or that we should, crucify them or anything. It just says the Bible teaches that homosexual acts are sinful. The pastor and this medical doctor now face jail time and a fine for having this statement on their website. Now, through all of these philosophical developments and societal influences and changing trends and so on, what is clear is that there are two fundamental planks in the foundation of the postmodern society, two prevailing assumptions that are held as unquestionable givens, and any who do question them show themselves by their questioning to be unenlightened and therefore in need of correction or, if need be, elimination. First of all, basic foundation number one, there is no God, no transcendent ruler to whom we are accountable. There might be something inexplicable beyond our knowing at the present moment, but it doesn't really affect us in any way because we're not accountable to he, she, it, them, whatever. Now, those who believe in a God or gods or something like a God are welcome to continue to believe whatever they like, so long as they understand that what they believe has nothing to do with real life. It doesn't actually mean anything at all. It's simply a private coping mechanism for life. And it cannot be allowed to affect anything in public, and it especially cannot be said to be necessary for anyone else to believe. As long as you keep it private inside your head, believe whatever you want. Secondly, basic foundation number two is I alone will determine what is right. I answer to no one for my beliefs, my moral choices, my actions. What I believe is right for me and cannot be questioned or challenged, unless it contradicts what those in power say is acceptable. And so in the United States today, according to the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, which was last amended in 1972, destroying the embryo of a bald eagle is a criminal felony punishable by a fine of up to $100,000 and a year in jail. $100,000 and a year in jail for destroying a bald eagle egg. But destroying a human embryo is a reproductive right. I'll let you chew on that one for a little while. So let's step back from the present day, though. Let's go back to the setting in the ancient Near East when Moses receives the Ten Commandments from God on Mount Sinai. The historical and cultural backdrop for that scene is really critical for us to grasp the significance of what is happening in Exodus 20. The people of Israel were an absolute anomaly in the ancient world. Every culture around them in the ancient Near East was polytheistic. Everyone believed in a variety of gods, spirits, and superhuman beings of some sort. The gods were viewed as having some measure of control over what happened in the world, so therefore it was necessary to appease them, hope to gain their favor through appropriate religious rituals that would be done in the proper manner with the necessary sacrifices. So piety, one's being religiously right, was measured by your attention to the forms of worship, sacrifices, prayers, obeisance to the priests and to the gods, payments. All that was required was that you do the ritual. Morality, what's right or wrong, wasn't connected to piety at all. Completely different worlds. Morality varied from culture to culture, time to time, depended upon who was in power or what your family traditions were or where you came from or what was possible. And there were certain constraints, constants. Murder, for instance, was usually forbidden, at least the murder of a nobleman or a free male. But God gave to Israel a completely different understanding of who God was and the relationship of knowing God, worshiping God, and morality. When we read Exodus 20, therefore, and we think about the Ten Commandments, we need to do two things from the very start. First, we must contrast what we read in Exodus 20 with what we know of the surrounding cultures. And then secondly, we must contrast what we read in Exodus 20 with what we know of our culture today. Because what we read in this passage is distinctly different from everything that everyone else in the ancient world understood, and it's drastically different from what the majority of people in our world today understand. It's not that the statements, both then and now, we don't see similar statements in the cultures of the ancient world or in the cultures of the postmodern world. It's that there's a distinctly different set of assumptions upon which the words of this passage rest. And we can see that difference clearly in the opening two verses of Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. The Ten Commandments begins with an address from a personal God to a specific people to whom God has shown himself through a saving event in actual human history, in their history, in order to bring that people into a covenantal relationship with himself. So the setting for this passage is crucial for understanding. Israel is at Sinai. It's been about a year since they left Egypt. Excuse me. God has been preparing them. He's been providing for them in the wilderness of Sinai. And now here on this mountain, he's making a covenant with them, a covenant that will establish them as his people. And the Mosaic Law is connected to that covenant, but the covenant is prior and primary. The covenant establishes the relationship between God and the people of Israel, and the relationship precedes the governance. The law explains how the covenant will be lived out. And the stipulations and the requirements of the law show how the people must live as those who are related by covenant. So the Ten Commandments are the foundation for the rest of the Mosaic Law. In fact, the various sections of Leviticus and Deuteronomy that contain the full law of Moses are essentially just expansions and applications of the basic principles and truths that are set out in the Ten Commandments. And we can see the importance of these 10 words, these 10 commands, in three crucial and distinguishing points in the narrative. Excuse me. First of all, throughout the rest of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, together that forms the Mosaic Law. Throughout the rest of those 5 books, Moses is the mediator for God. God speaks to Moses, tells him what to say to the people. Moses then repeats what God has said, told him to say. And the people bring their complaints to Moses. Moses presents them to the Lord. God answers him, and Moses takes the answer back to the people. So before Exodus 20 and after Exodus 20, Moses is the mediator through whom God speaks to his people. But here, in this very exceptional instance, God himself speaks directly to the people. In fact, it's repeated for emphasis in verse 22. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven." Secondly, throughout this passage and all of the commandments, the pronoun you is singular. You shall not make an image, you shall not steal, etc., etc. That means God is addressing every hearer individually, not just speaking to the group as a whole. Now, the covenant is made with the people as a nation, but each individual within it must respond to God's commands and is summoned to do so by God. Finally, when we look at these commands in the Hebrew language, there are two forms for stating a prohibition in Hebrew. One of them is weaker. It's used when stating that a particular instance or example in which something or other must not be done. Here's a case of we shouldn't do this. The other is stronger. It's a categorical prohibition that's universally valid and binding. And the prohibitions of the Ten Commandments are all stated using this latter, stronger form. So they're important. They're significant in terms of the relationship to the covenant, the rest of the Levitical law. So what do we do with all this information? And here's what I'm pointing to with all of this. The Ten Commandments are not simply a floating top 10 list. They're not just a list of important parts of some generic moral code. They are the foundational center of the law, and that law defines and regulates how the covenantal relationship with God must be lived out by the people of Israel. The Ten Commandments are therefore inseparable from that covenant, and they only make sense in the fullest sense in connection with that covenant. Well, it's at that point some bright students are going to pop up and say, well, hang on, isn't that the old covenant? Aren't we Christians under a different covenant? Why should we pay attention to these commandments? Honestly, it's a fair question. Fortunately, I don't have time today to discuss the 7 main ways that question's been answered in the history of the church, but here's my answer in brief. The Mosaic Law is no longer applicable to Christians as a covenant by which we relate to God. But the individual commandments or the eternal principles on which they are founded are still applicable to the believer, either because they're included in the new covenant or because they're founded in God's nature. In other words, the law, including the Ten Commandments, reflects God's nature, reflects who He is. It expresses that to us to show us how to live out what it means to be in relationship to God. Yes, we do live under a new covenant. You cannot be right with God simply by trying to obey the Ten Commandments. But they are still part of Scripture, and they still reveal God to us, and they're still instructive for us to understand who God is and what it looks like to be His people. Paul emphasizes this for us in the passage we read earlier today from 1 Corinthians. He reminds us that the examples of the people of Israel were given to us through the writings of the Old Testament in order to instruct us and to direct us. By the way, that's one of the reasons both Jesus and the authors of the New Testament regularly, frequently appeal to the Old Testament as authoritative writings which are presumed to be inspired by God and determinative for knowing God's will and His ways. They believed that the Holy Spirit was still speaking to them through the Scriptures in their current situation. And so should we. What then is our conclusion? We have a law, the basis of a covenant made by God with the people Israel, through which God has personally and directly revealed Himself and His ways to the world. That law instructs us, we upon whom the ends of the age have come. Its words show us crucial principles for how to live as God's people, presents us with an authoritative set of moral principles that define what is right and good and what is wrong and evil. But we live in the 21st century. We have TikTok. We live among a people who have been formed by the musings of philosophers that have been embraced by artists and filmmakers and musicians and politicians and activists and social media influencers and entrepreneurs and business moguls and on and on and on. We live in a world that insists that we start with the unquestioned assumption that there is nothing transcendent to which we are accountable. We live among people who insist that there is no such thing as morality, only preferences. And everyone's preference is acceptable unless it challenges the prevailing order by insisting that there is a God whose will can be known and whose word alone determines what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is evil. What do we do in such a world? Well, if we are the people who are related to God by a covenant, Our moral standards cannot be determined by the popular culture around us, no matter how loudly it is proclaimed to be good or right. Our moral standards cannot be determined by our own preferences, or by our family's traditions, or by our own reasoning, or by the changing mores of our community, and certainly not by the changing of a calendar page. The moral foundations of our lives, our moral compasses, must be shaped by God's nature and His Word, not by what we think ought to be the case, or what others tell us they think ought to be the case. And whatever happens elsewhere, we are different. And just as Israel was called to be a distinctive people in the midst of a world of polytheists with despicable and horrific customs and practices, just as the early church was called to be a distinctive people in the midst of a world of pagans worshiping a host of gods and goddesses in a culture of rampant immorality and barbaric practices. And just as the church in every age, in every place, has been called to be a distinctive people in the midst of contrary voices, brutal governments, and hostile cultures, so too we are called to be a people distinguished by the way we live in relationship to our God. If we are faithful to Him, we will stand out as being different, and that will not be popular. We will be misunderstood. We will be accused of being hateful and backward and ignorant and worse. We will be despised by some, pitied by others, mocked by many, and even attacked. So you better get used to it. Because if you're going to follow Jesus, this is the road we're on. And if we keep on it, there will be some who will be convinced to follow along with us when they tire of the insanity that is flooding this world. Because it is insane. That's our road. And that's the road that leads out of insanity to freedom, to genuine